The first night after my divorce, I sat on the porch of an abandoned lake cabin with 2 suitcases at my feet and nowhere else to go. The lock on the front door was so rusted that it wouldn't turn. I remember staring at it in the darkness, wondering how a life could fall apart so completely in such a short amount of time. Just 2 weeks earlier, I had stood in a courtroom watching a judge hand nearly everything I had spent 12 years helping build to my ex-husband. My name is Emily Parker, and for most of my adult life, I believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I believed sacrifice mattered. I believed that if you stood beside someone long enough, they would stand beside you too. I was wrong. When I married Ryan, he was struggling to launch his career. I worked exhausting shifts at a hospital while he chased opportunities and built connections. When success finally arrived for him, he promised we would enjoy it together. Instead, the moment his business took off, our marriage slowly became less important to him. By the time he filed for divorce, I barely recognized the man I had once trusted with my future. The court hearing was humiliating. Ryan sat across from me looking polished and confident while his attorney described him as the sole reason for our financial success. Nobody mentioned the years I spent supporting him. Nobody mentioned the sacrifices I made. The house went to him. The cars went to him. The savings went to him. The retirement accounts went to him. By the end of the morning, the only thing I had left was a small settlement check and an old cabin my grandfather had left me years earlier. To everyone else, the cabin was worthless. To me, it was the last piece of home I still had. I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and drove several hours north. When I finally arrived, the property looked forgotten by time. Weeds covered the driveway. Dust coated the windows. The lock was frozen shut. After smashing it open with a rock, I stepped inside and immediately smelled cedar wood. For a moment, it felt like my grandfather was still there. Nothing had changed. His books remained on the shelves. His paintings still hung on the walls. His old fishing gear rested beside the door. The memories hit me so hard that I collapsed onto the couch and cried until my chest hurt. The next several days were miserable. The cabin was freezing. The plumbing barely worked. I survived on canned soup because I was terrified of spending money. My mother called once, but instead of asking how I was doing, she criticized me for staying there. According to her, my grandfather had always spoiled me. That conversation reminded me why I had always felt more loved by him than almost anyone else in my family. As the days passed, I cleaned every room. I repaired broken fixtures and organized old belongings. Then one afternoon, while dusting a large painting above the fireplace, I noticed something strange. The frame shifted more than it should have. When I removed it from the wall, I found an envelope taped behind it. My hand started shaking the moment I saw my name written across the front. Inside was a handwritten letter, a brass key, and a business card belonging to a local attorney named Daniel Mercer. I sat on the floor and read the letter over and over again. My grandfather wrote that he had spent years watching me give too much of myself to people who never appreciated my value. He admitted he could never stop me from making those mistakes, but he hoped that one day I would understand my own worth. Then he explained the purpose of the key. It belonged to a safety deposit box. The following morning, I drove into town and visited the bank listed in the letter. The manager immediately recognized my grandfather's name and escorted me downstairs. What I found inside changed my life forever. The box contained property deeds, legal documents, and journals filled with decades of handwritten records. As I read through them, I discovered a side of my grandfather I had never known. For nearly 40 years, he had quietly purchased land surrounding the lake. 1 parcel became 2. 2 became 4. 4 became 7. By the time he passed away, he owned more than 200 acres of valuable waterfront property. I nearly stopped breathing when I saw the estimated value. The land wasn't worth hundreds of thousands. It was worth millions. The reason nobody knew was because everything had been protected through a private trust. My grandfather had deliberately kept ownership hidden. Even my mother had no idea. As I continued reading, I found a journal entry that stunned me even more. Years before his death, he had written about Ryan. He believed my husband loved what I provided, not who I was. My grandfather had predicted almost exactly how everything would end. Soon afterward, I learned that a major development company had spent years trying to acquire the land. Their entire luxury resort project depended on the property my grandfather controlled. Then another shocking truth surfaced. One of the investors behind the project was Ryan's business partner. Suddenly, everything made sense. Ryan had never cared about the cabin because he believed it was worthless. The moment he discovered its true value, he began contacting me again. He claimed he wanted to help. He claimed he was worried about me. But I knew the truth. He wanted access to the land. When he eventually showed up at the cabin, I finally saw him clearly. For years, I had viewed him through the lens of love. Now, I saw only greed. He tried convincing me that we could work together. He talked about opportunities, partnerships, and rebuilding trust. What he really wanted was control. For the first time in my life, I refused to let someone else decide my future. I told him to leave. And this time, he did. The months that followed were filled with legal challenges, business negotiations,